Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha, which will be archived, is the Parsha of Shoftim. And it, of course, begins with the creation of all of the mechanisms for a Jewish state. Legislative, of course, is Moshe Rabbeinu and Har Sinai. Those halachot are not subject to change. They were given in Har Sinai. However, of course, we have Shoftim v'shoterim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha. The Torah tells us that in a model Jewish state, the very first element that is to be created is that of Shoftim, of those who shall judge mishpat tzedek tirdof, that we have the obligation, as Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel says, to pursue righteousness, but it must be done with righteousness. As my Rabbi Rabbi Soloveitchik mentioned to us many years ago, that from here we can see from a Jewish standpoint that the ends do not justify the means. If we seek tzedek, if we seek justice, then those avenues that we use to pursue justice must themselves be just. Those are the Shoftim. And then the Torah sets up the Melech, the king, who is the executive, who oversees everything, who is responsible for tzedek, and of course, in many cases, as we know with Shlomo, with David, adjudicating cases, but also, of course, to create those avenues by which a Jewish state should function, whether it be with the army and with all of the limitations, the army and other things. And of course, the king is the only person who has a limitations upon the way in which he lives. He cannot accumulate undue wealth. Other Jews, they can be as wealthy as they would like, and as their work ethic allows, as long as it is done in accordance with Torah, in accordance with halacha. There is no limit to the riches of any single person. Secondly, there is the issue of horses. They're not to accumulate an unlimited number of horses, not to return to Mitzrayim, but the normal Jew could have as many horses as he wants. And then the third thing, of course, is that he has a limitation on wives, which in theory, of course, there's no limit to the wives in the Torah itself, as long as things are done halachically. But nevertheless, there is for the king a limitation. And it would seem that these three elements that the Torah limits the king, these three areas, really deal with all political power in all countries and all societies, and that politicians, so to speak, and the king must be to some degree a politician. We know it from Shmuel Bet, we know it from Shmuel Aleph, that in fact a king must function within a society, even though, of course, he is the most authoritative, most powerful person in this society. And so the limitations that the Torah puts upon a melech are as follows. A limit to wealth, as we mentioned before. Kesef v'zahav. Why? What is the limitation? The answer is that in political life, and those who seek authority and power, they seek very, very often, their downfall comes from pursuit of material wealth. The second element that we see, that people who have political power oftentimes use it for their own sexual perceived needs. And that, of course, is also not uncommon, not in the United States or in other societies. So therefore, the Torah says a limit to why. Third element, which is represented, is the limitation upon horses. Raw power, the ability to get what one wants when one wants it. So the horse represents the material power, not just wealth, but power to wield in any way that he hopes. And the Torah tells us there will be a limitation on your power. There certainly will be limitation upon your sexual pursuits, and that there will be limitations upon your material wealth if you are the king. Now, we're going to add now a very interesting halacha that comes at the very end of Parshat Shoftim, and that is when an anonymous corpse is found in a field in Eretz Yisrael, and this halacha applies in Eretz Yisrael. The Jews are about to enter Eretz Yisrael. And so we find many halachot that deal with how we are to conduct ourselves. We talked about the shofet, we talked about the melech, we talked about the shotrim, the people that execute the law itself to make sure that they make sure that the law is followed. But in Perek Chaf Aleph Pasuk, actually Pesukim Aleph, all the way through Tet, we find 9 psukim which deal with finding the death a person who is murdered, and we don't know who that person is. The Torah says, "Ki yimatzei halal ba'adama asher Hashem Elokecha notein lecha l'ishta." If there is found in the ground, usually it's ba'aretz, haaretz asher Hashem Elokecha notein lecha. Here, interestingly, the Torah veers away from the term ba'aretz and uses the word ba'adama. Nofel basadeh, he is found having fallen in the field, not a field, the field. And of course, the question is, what the usage of the word basadeh, a bit unusual. Lo nodam mihikach. The Torah tells us then we are to the Gdolim of the city. He's between 2 cities. So the Gedolim of each city, the Zikenim, are required to literally measure off the piece from the city limits, the measure from the city limits to the corpse on both sides. We don't know exactly which city is closer, but the closer of the 2 cities is to bring what is called an egla rufa, and it is to involve the Zikenim, the most prominent people in the city. And Chazal tell us also it is also to include some members of the Sanhedrin Agadol Yerushalayim. They are all to stop whatever they're doing, and they are to go they are going to measure from the city limits of city A, city B, not Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is not in itself is not a part of this. It's also excluded from other halachot. But nevertheless, the Torah tells us that that's what they are to do. And then in a field which is completely barren, rocky, something which will not produce great great agricultural strides, or even to use as farmland, they're to take an egla, a young heifer, and they are to actually literally behead in front of the zikanim of these cities. And the Sefer Chinuch says one of the reasons this is done is because it is to cause a tremendous upheaval within the cities, that something terrible has happened. And every person in these 2 cities, particularly the most prominent people in these cities, are obligated to say, what have I not done to protect this person? What person? For all we know he's probably a vagabond. Could be that he's not just a wayfarer, but he certainly could be a person anonymous, not known to any of the people in the two cities, and yet this is what they are to do. We have an obligation of leviyah, of literally accompanying this person, providing provisions for the person when he leaves our city. And we must, the people must proclaim after the Hefer, the Egla Rufa is literally killed, and the people see the starkness of this particular ceremony, says the Sefer Chinuch, when people see that, they become determined to find the perpetrator of the murder. Could be that the person who has been killed was killed because they tried to attack someone and they lost. Could be that they were robbed, he was robbed, or at least attacked, and therefore we all have to know. Now, the interesting thing is that the Torah here gives us a remarkable connection to the first murder in all of human history. There's a certain, it is eerily reminiscent in the use of words. Because let us read here about when Cain killed Hevel, way back at the beginning of time. Cain is distraught by the fact that his korban was not accepted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to him and says, why are you distraught? Lama nafalu panecha? Why are you so downcast? Hashem says to Cain, before anything happens, he says to him, Halom teitiv say, just know, if you become better, you make yourself better, say, you can lift your face. You don't have to be downtrodden. You can lift it because you've done what you should be doing. V'im lo teitiv, but if you don't become better. In fact, if you become so upset that you literally engage in activities that you should not, you should know about petach chatat roves. You should know that if you have sinned, talking to Cain, but he's really talking to you and me. All of the Torah is setting is in Cain and Hevel and Avram and Sarah and the brothers. So it's talking about them, of course. It's also talking about me. It's a connection. When one is upset or disappointed because of what they did not get, what they perceived they should get and didn't get, so then they have to realize, Alon Tetiv say, you can become better. You have b'chira chofshit. And then he says, V'im lo tetiv, but if you don't become better, b'petach chatat roves, it'll follow you to the grave. Things over the activities that we do over which we don't do tshuva follow us to the grave. The eilecha tishukato, and your yetzer hara is out to get you. Says, say the Meforshim. But here's the good news. Last three words of Ve'ata shalom. But you can control. You can overcome whatever that you have done wrong because you have b'chira chofshi. You can overcome the yetzer. But the next thing we find is that Cain kills Hevel. But let's notice the terminology that we have here in this in this episode. What does it say? It says that after Hashem's discussion with Cain, it says, "Vayihi biotam basadeh." It was when they were both in the field. Now we know that certain Meforshim say, the Sforno and others say that what happened was, why in the Sadeh? Because Cain knew very well that what he was about to do would just cause pain to his parents. And so therefore he waited till he was out of their sight. Vahi biotam basadeh, when they were in the field. Vayakom Cain el Hevel achi vayargeu, he killed him. Yomer Hashem el Cain, Hevel achicha. Hashem said to Cain, where's your brother? Where is Hevel? Yomer lo yadat. Says Cain, I don't know. Hashomer achi anochi. Am I my brother's keeper? One of the most famous passages in the Torah. Now, something that always troubled me is this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers him by saying, Vayomer me'asita, what have you done? Kol demei achicha, so akim elai min ha'adama. The sound of your brother's blood in the plural sense. Demei achicha, what is that? So akim elai min ha'adama, are crying out from the land. Here we have a threefold connection between the first murder and the first murderer and the first murder victim, Cain and Hevel, and of course, the Torah's rendition of what the halacha should be about one who is killed. These three words, Adama, here in Bereshit, and there, or shall we say the other way around, here in Parashat Shoftim, the word is Ba'adama she'Hashem Elokecha noten lecha. Not Ba'aretz. Usually the Torah says Ba'aretz she'Hashem Elokecha noten. The second connection, linguistically, semantically, is the connection of Basadeh, Vayi biotam Basadeh, when they were in the field, not Basadeh, Basadeh, in the field. And the exact same word is used to connect here, make a semantic connection here in Parshat Shoftim, Nofel Basadeh, falling in the field. No need to mention that. In the field, no need. He's dead. The Torah goes out of its way to use the same words in both the very first murder and to this murder, which is yet to come in Eretz Israel. God forbid it shouldn't come, but of course, in a society it comes. And then, of course, the Kohanim are required, upon seeing the beheading of this Egla Rufa, they then are told to utter a prayer to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kaperla, first they swear that they were not negligent in taking care of this poor person who is now dead. And then they say, Kaperla Amcha Yisrael, Hashem, forgive the Jewish people, Asher Padita, V'al titein dam naki b'kerev Amcha Yisrael. Don't allow the death of innocent people in this your land and your people. And that the blood itself should be atoned for them. And then the Torah turns to us, or Kohanim then turn, and they say, you must eradicate dam naki, innocent blood, from your people. When you do that which is right in the eyes of the Lord. A remarkable connection. The Torah specifically ties this. Murders are not independent. Murders actually began with Cain, and they continue even to this day in the cities of the United States, and they continue in societies wherever they may be. Can you imagine the mayor and the city council? 1, 2, 3, each of them is moving, and they're measuring from the field from where the person died until to see which city is the closest. Here, it doesn't even make page 3 or 5. That's the way it is nowadays in the world in which we live. As a matter of fact, Chazal say when murders became so common that this particular ceremony couldn't be done anymore. The whole idea is the ceremony is to take hold of the neshama of every human being, of every Jew who lives in that society. And they fail. So therefore, the Torah tells us, so why didn't Hashem answer Cain? Tell him, yes, you are your brother's keeper. That's the real question. You are your brother's keeper. The answer, I think, is as follows. That had Hashem said to Cain, yes, you are your brother's keeper, what would Cain have said? After all, he was a human being. He was the second generation of human being. He would say, well, maybe that's true, I am. If the person is very prominent, yes, I'm his keeper. If the person owns one quarter of the gross national product, or considerably less, then I have to watch. Now the Torah waited 2,488 years. When a Jewish state is already, the blueprint of a Jewish state is in place. We have Shoftim, we have Shotrim, we have legislation, and we have a Melech. Now you should know, not only are you your brother's keeper when that person is prominent, and when that person is wealthy, and when that person is famous, you are your brother's keeper. When you don't even know who he is for you nameless. He is a person for whom you would normally have no respect necessarily at all, or any sense of obligation. Versus now let me tell you how far Shomer Achicha is. That the most prominent people, Shoftim, Zekenim, the Kohanim, all of them must engage in the process of determining who this person is and who the murderer is. So it's not just that he is an indigent, unknown person. That's the very person the society is supposed to look out for. This new society, whose legislative and judicial element is laid out in Parshat Shoftim. Erev Tov to everybody, and Shabbat.